Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connecticut's Old State House, or welcome back to Connecticut's Old State House. Really good again to see some returning faces. My name is Mariana Garcia. I'm the Public Programs Manager here at Connecticut's Old State House, and I just want to welcome you all to the third and final program in our series, Control Shift Democracy, Digital Equity, Digital Divide. So the digital divide represents the gap between those who have access to digital technologies and those who do not. This disparity can stem from various factors, including socioeconomic status, geographic location, age, and educational background. In today's increasingly connected world, digital inclusion is essential for ensuring equal opportunity and fostering social and economic development, and perhaps most important of all nowadays, to have full civic engagement. This is what this entire series has been leading up to. The series on the interconnection of democracy and technology, because by discussing the digital divide, we aim to highlight the barriers that prevent equitable access to digital resources and explore strategies to bridge this gap, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, can benefit from our digital age. So we have a wonderful panel of experts here to share on our last program on our series. So as always, I would love to have your questions. At the very end, we will have a short Q&A session. One of my colleagues will come over to you with a mic if you raise your hand because you have a question. And I will be having a panel conversation with our speakers for about 50 minutes, and then we'll get to the questions. Please feel free to grab some snacks and drinks from the tables over here. And now if you'll please allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists. All right, so we're joined by Christine Graveau, who is a library consultant in the Division of Library Development at the Connecticut State Library. She supports libraries in the state and utilizes E-rate discounts, is a coordinator for the state library for its major federal grant from the Library Service and Technology Agency, and leads the Connecticut State Library Digital Inclusion Support work. Thank you so much for joining us, Christine. We're also joined by Lauren Thompson, who is the Digital Equity Program Manager for the Commission for Educational Technology at the Department of Administrative Services. In her current role, she is dedicated to bridging the digital divide and ensuring equitable access to technology for all members of the community. Lauren also served as a librarian branch manager and head of community services. In these roles, she focused on fostering community engagement and enhancing library services to meet the needs of diverse populations. Outside of her professional life, Lauren is a devoted mother to her amazing little boy who just recently turned 2. And finally, Professor Robert Wilson, who is a distinguished visiting professor in the School of Public Policy and former director of the Sustainable Global Cities Initiative at the University of Connecticut. He has co-edited several publications and authored over 60 journal articles, book chapters, and policy reports. Recently, Dr. Wilson and others at the School of Public Policy at UConn conducted research for a state proposal to tackle the digital divide by scoping barriers that keep disenfranchised groups from having full access to broadband. And the work of the School of Public Policy team will be integrated into a proposal for the digital equity plan for the state. Well, thank you all of you for joining us for this really important conversation that we are going to have today. So why don't we go ahead and start with our questions here. So as always, I would like to start out with some basic groundwork. Why don't you all just very briefly explain to me what the digital divide is and why is it a question for public policy? Would anybody like to begin? We'll go in order. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, digital equity is really a systemic issue. And there's a famous quote from Congressman John Lewis who said that the digital divide, internet access, is a civil rights issue of the 21st century. And I think that that's true. Why did he say that? Because affordability looms very large as one of the major obstacles to digital inclusion. And he pointed out, well, others have pointed out that 34 million Americans currently live below the poverty line. And when you consider racialization, you find that 1 in 5 Black Americans live below the poverty line. and struggle to, or would struggle to pay for broadband service. There was a big study in Connecticut, the Horrigan Report, and there's updated statistics, but I found the simplicity of this I could handle. That 38% of residents in 5 Connecticut cities have not had broadband internet at home. 36% of Connecticut households with income below the median level of $75,000 have not had connectivity at home. 33% of households with income below the median have not had a computer in the home. And libraries have found, and nationally the research has shown, that in every town, no matter how wealthy, 7 to 10%, likely closer to 10% of the population is in this situation, missing key elements that would allow them to be digitally digitally served. Thank you. And did you want to talk about the policy question? We'll go, or maybe we'll come back.
Yeah.
There's a lot done on the importance of digital equity as a policy issue. It's not just the inequity that exists, but it's also the fact that that inequity contributes to unemployment, to low productivity, to failure to retain employees. It means that government service recommendations about government services are much less diverse, much less responsive to communities. It means that the government services may not hit their mark because a big chunk of the population is not really engaged in civic discourse and other functions of democracy. So that the digital, it has to be a central policy question because it dramatically affects the well-being of everyone. And there's a wonderful little study by the Boston group, which if anyone's interested after I could show you, that argues this really persuasively in a way that could be used with stakeholders that you're engaged with.
Thank you so much, Christine. Lauren, is there anything you would like to add?
Yes, so it's certainly a policy issue. In order to fully participate in society right now, you need access to the internet, the skills to use devices, and a proper device. So that being said, I'll give like little anecdotes, right? As a public librarian, people came in the library to get access to their bank statements, get access to applying for a mortgage. You can't do those things without being online anymore. So not having access is a public issue because people are losing access to other services as a result. I don't think it's intentional in any way, but we have to be mindful of what access does for our lives. Even if you want to, if you're homebound and you want to participate in, a public meeting, a lot of those are available online. And if you can't leave the house, but you can attend online, if you don't have a computer and you don't know how to log into Zoom, you cannot participate. And while I think sometimes individuals want us to go back a certain way, I don't see us going back. So the way forward is making sure people have the skills and devices and the internet access.
Exactly.
I think in your introduction, Mariana, the basic concept, people have access to the internet or not, is a great starting place to understand what the policy issue is. And if you're on the wrong side of that divide, what are the implications? So the way I would think about whether this should be a policy issue or not is for the people on the wrong side of the divide, what harm is done to them? And we've just heard that discussion. A lot of things, a lot of disadvantages accrue to people that don't have access to the internet. Then on the other side of it, it's kind of the mechanics of the internet are things that we need to measure, we need to define and we need to measure, because if we are going to take action, we need to know why people don't have access. And this can be the result of three primary categories of factors. One, And I'm going to use the definition of broadband that's now being used primarily in the national policy, a broadband connection to the home, a line to the home. Now, I know we can discuss what about satellites, what about cell phones, there's a lot of discussion, but let's think of broadband, high capacity internet connection to the home. So a wire into a home. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And there's other ways to define that. So one reason people may not be connected is there's no wire, there's no provider, there's no company, there's no service being provided to the home. So that could be a cause of the divide. A second is maybe there's a wire, but people do not have the equipment, don't have a computer or the right kind of device to be able to connect. So that's one category, kind of the mechanics of connecting to the internet. A second, which has already been mentioned, is affordability. People may have wires and they may be having a little computer, but they can't afford the cost of internet connection. So that's what we talk in terms of affordability. And I'll just highlight that. That is one of the primary issues, policy issues. Then a third category, and we hear both from Lauren and Chris, they've already talked about this, is the skills and knowledge level of the individuals that are going to be using the internet. That's where the barrier is. People don't have a good understanding about how to use it and are concerned about privacy and about fraud, all kinds of things. So making sure people are informed consumers of the internet is also an important piece of this puzzle. So those are the three pieces that I would say are important in terms of understanding the policy issue. Is there a physical connection? And if not, why not? Secondly, what kind of barriers are for people to connect? If there is a connection, would be a second category. And we need to measure those things in order to get some idea of the scale of the problem. How many people are being affected? What populations are most severely affected? Kind of already suggested that low-income people suffer affordability more than anyone else. So maybe there should be the target of public policy. So say that to
right.
get us started.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so Lauren, in your work at the Commission, what do you tell people? Why is it so important for everybody to have access to these digital resources? And what disadvantages could someone that doesn't have full access or the full knowledge or the hardware that they need, what disadvantages are they facing?
Yeah, so lacking technology access can truly hinder a person's ability to thrive in today's society. It's taking away the opportunity to explore different job opportunities. It's taking away the opportunity to explore education in a non-traditional setting. You know, we see a lot of discussion on building skills at home and, you know, frankly, sifting through what is appropriate on YouTube is not that easy, right? Like, it's not that easy to know what a reputable source is. And it's not that easy to navigate not clicking on, you know, some kind of, you know, link that's going to get you a virus. Yeah, it's staying safe online. It's and it's the ability to move forward. So when I say thrive, I'm saying, you know, it can impact so many parts of your life that you don't necessarily think about day to day. But if each of you just take a second and think about all the different things that you use technology to get done, think about not having access to that thing. So that if that means not having access to a smartphone because you couldn't pay the bill that month, it means not having access to your laptop because, you know, maybe your child accidentally spilled their drink on it and you don't have money to run out the door and buy a brand new item, right? Because the price difference from when you got it to today has gone up hundreds of dollars. Mm-hmm. So that barrier to access is often boiled down to how much money you have available to you that month. But the truth is, it's more than that. It's making affordable devices available. It's making affordable internet available. Every town in Connecticut possibly has a different carrier. You know, people are paying different prices for the same service. And having that discussion on what is affordable is really important. So what I would say is the disadvantages, are really hard to quantify. It's going to come down to the individual. But what we can do as a state is work together and figure out what problems are most common and what problems we can support. So I will leave it there because I'm sure everyone's got many things to say about this topic. But yeah, it can affect your ability to thrive, and that's really really significant.
Yeah, and isn't it the biggest irony that so many of the services that do exist to help people that are in these situations are digital, right? So how can they reach it?
Yep.
If they need the help to reach it, how can they get the help?
Yep, and equity requires all three of those things, which is access to the internet, access to the proper device, and access to the skills to use those devices.
Exactly. All right, so Professor Robert, you already mentioned, started speaking about the importance of data in order to understand where the need is. So you could just speak a little bit more into how the data can help us define the problem of digital inequity.
I'd be glad to. I participated, as was mentioned in the introduction, in a study of Connecticut and about internet usage, and did this actually. Lauren was kind of our boss in this project. So worked with her and her colleagues. And so we documented there is a digital divide in Connecticut. This will come as a surprise to no one. It is true our divide is not as severe as in other states.
I got it.
But I don't think we should be overly optimistic about that statement. But the levels of, on the wrong side of the divide are a little bit different here than elsewhere, but it's still a serious problem. One good thing about the state is that we have service providers, and just so everybody knows what we're talking about, a service provider could be a cable company, it could be a telephone company, it could be, you could get it from the satellite, you can have Frontier, internet service providers, so there's a variety of ways, a variety of providers. And most of the state is covered by at least one provider, so that's good. There's some pockets up in the Northwest in more rural areas where there's fewer providers. And then sometimes even in our cities, there'll be pockets where we don't have good connections, even though there are service providers there for other reasons about connecting in older urban areas. There's challenges. But that's good. Relatively good news that there are services, the wires available if people want to use it. But overall, we do have a divide. And Chris mentioned the study that was done, I think it was 2018 by John Horrigan. And I did not go back to look at it, but at that point, I think your number said 35%. We have made progress since then. And the number that we came up with for the state as a whole, about 12% of the households do not have a broadband connection. They may have internet through cell phones, but we don't consider a cell phone as internet to broadband. So that number is relatively good to other states. But if we look at different populations, we see there really is problems. So now if we delve into the divide a little bit and try to flesh it out, in the study that we did for Lauren and as part of this grant proposal, we had to look at different groups of people, and I won't give you the whole list, but I'll mention some now. And we found different results have run among different groups. So the groups that had the highest share of people without access included people below 150% of poverty, minority populations, individuals with limited literacy, English capacity, limited English literacy, and formerly incarcerated. So among that group of people, we found the lack of access around 20%, so quite a bit higher than for the population as a whole. Another group we looked at, individuals with disabilities and vets, and veterans. That group had a higher rate, 12 to 14%, so a little bit higher than population as a whole. And then some surprising results. Rural populations had pretty good access. Not too many people in rural areas without access, which was a bit of a surprise. And the over 65, which was also a little bit of a surprise. The over 65 are pretty intensive users of internet. Of course, within that group, you have people of all sorts of different abilities. So breaking it out, those were the populations where you saw higher rates of lack of access. In terms of barriers, what impedes people from getting access, on the affordability question, in some government data, we were able to estimate how the monthly premium of a household pays for internet connection. And the number that was provided through the data is $68. Now, we can't get too excited about this number because it may include bundled services as well. Like with your cable, it's hard to figure out what you're paying for the internet. But 68 was what low-income individuals were paying. The rest of the population was paying $78 or $80. So right there you can see a difference in price and very likely a difference in quality of the internet. But affordability was a big issue among all these populations. Around 10% were saying that affordability was a real barrier to getting access. The share of people that have no service available, no providers, no connection to the house, that was around 6%, relatively low, still a problem, but relatively low. People with disabilities they have a number of barriers. We do know there's a whole range of software and other kinds of devices that are targeted to disabled populations to make sure they have access, and a lot of them work well, but we still have that population has special barriers. Literacy, a very big problem. If people have problems with literacy, this is a huge barrier, as you can imagine, in using the access. Another barrier that was a bit of a surprise to us was concerns about privacy. And we know that there's lots of fraud, scams, phishing, and other kinds of activities. So a lot of people are really worried about getting on the internet because of privacy concerns. So those are the kinds of barriers that specific barriers that we found, things that would need to be addressed in a plan, and I know our state plan is looking at some of those. One other point that I'd like to make that was kind of interesting about the use made of internet. We were able in our survey to figure out what people did with the internet. And overwhelmingly, there are three categories: for shopping, communicating with family and friends, and for kind of personal business on the internet, connecting to your bank and so forth. One concern that we all share is the concern of the access to public services. If you're not on the internet, are you going to have good access to public services? Submit your income tax over the internet, or get your Social Security taken care of through the internet so you don't have to go to the store and so forth. We found that some of these subpopulations, particularly over 65, a high use made of access to public services. The disabled population also, a high use of access to services. So this suggests to me, kind of confirms the point that being made that people that don't have access, particularly with different kinds of disadvantages, really suffer harm by not being able to access the internet. So this was kind of the reverse. We were looking at how people use it, and then from that say, well, if you don't have access to use it, if you're over 65, this is going to be a real problem of being available for services for Medicare or Social Security.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Christine, I'm going to turn on to you because the Connecticut State Library has been playing a very visible role in tackling the digital divide problem. So I wanted to ask you, what got you started in this work, and how have you chosen to contribute to the work?
Sure, thanks. I'm delighted to talk about this because it's been quite a journey. During the pandemic, the state library and all the public libraries that we serve were trying to move from providing in-person services to online services, and very quickly realized that most of the people who need the services weren't online. And initial activities to reach people sometimes meant doing a mass snail mail in the city or putting ads in a local newspaper, and so forth. So suddenly we realized that, libraries realized that there's a huge problem here. And this was happening nationally, and sort of a peer group of practitioners from agencies, service providers, libraries, began to get together locally, regionally, and then nationally. And there was this big umbrella group, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, which provided a home for that and structure and spaces where peer groups could begin to develop best practices for dealing with the digital equity, providing digital inclusion services. At the center was this thing called the Digital Navigator Model. That is, very quickly, everybody trying to do this work found that trust was a huge issue, that vulnerable communities are really not necessarily so trustful if somebody shows up from the state government, or if somebody shows up from a cable company, or if somebody suggests that they do something. The first inclination is, this is a scam, this is some kind of threat, maybe you don't have papers, maybe, anyway, it's just a huge issue. So it's very clear that what was needed were community-trusted mentors, people already active in the community, already trusted by the community, not the best tech guy you can have to give a tech skills class, but somebody, a mover and shaker from the community that could say, this is okay, there are some risks, there are some issues, but this is the other side, make a decision, make a choice. And so what happened was we were part of these discussions, and when the ARPA funds came through the Library Services and Technology Act to the state library during the pandemic, we decided to use $400,000 of that to set up 4 pilot projects of public libraries to provide 3 things: digital navigation by trusted community mentors, devices to those who needed them, large screen devices, because we know you don't make a job application or go to school on your smartphone, effectively at least, and getting high-speed broadband to their homes. And this was the best practices that were outlined nationally. So we got 4 libraries, each got $100,000. For 9 months, they were able to allocate navigators into the community. 1,600 people asked for appointments. They successfully met repeatedly with about 700 unique individuals. Half of those people needed large screen devices and were given those devices, and so forth. And out of it, we realized that we learned a lot. We learned a lot about the importance of community partners. We learned a lot about who a navigator has to be. The criteria is somebody who has empathy, can talk to people from a lot of walks of life, who's respectful and humble and knows they're going to learn something from people that they're assisting, and who are, and so forth, not the highest tech skills, but willing to learn with people and help people learn with them. So out of this, we also set up this experience. We followed the national precedent and created this network called Connecticut Libraries and Partners for Digital Equity, which there's lots of models for this. Ours is pretty simple. We provide a space once a month where librarians, people in agencies, nonprofit organizations, community organizations who are concerned about closing the digital divide can come together and share experiences and so forth. Out of all of this, finally, because of this work, we were just awarded a $250,000 grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences to create, to advance the model. And the goal was to create a regional sharing navigation plans where we brought together small libraries and large libraries, those who had programs and didn't, urban and rural. We have like 7 of them, and we came together to hire navigators based on their community needs assessments. They targeted the languages that they thought were the most important, so we ended up hiring an Arabic-speaking navigator, 2 Spanish language navigators. And we're just in October, we're going to National Digital Inclusion Week. We'll be formally launching that, but right now the navigators are hired and doing this work. The goal is to meet one-on-one, in person, with repeated engagements, as many as needed, with individuals, and get to the point where they feel that they have acquired the skills and the device and the internet they need to do what they want to do. And it's an incredibly satisfying experience. The navigators meet together, they're peer groups, and they meet with, each library works with a community partner, vets, a reentry group, or IRIS, refugee groups, immigrant rights groups like Junta, or some combination. And so anyway, so this is our current project. We hope to write up this experience. We think it's one way that you can spread the wealth of navigation among a greater number of communities at once at the same cost, if not in the same volume, but you can begin to spread this model. And out of these experiences, we found that showing the data, bringing happy clients and navigators into the view of stakeholders and town officials and everybody is very effective. Of our pilots, 3 out of the 4 ended up with town funding for a navigation program. We hope out of this regional plan that something similar will happen, but that we're also providing models that sub-awardees may be able to use as these federal funds roll into our states. Anyway, I don't want to go on too much longer, but just to say, libraries are part of creating important models that need to be scaled up. Thanks.
So important. Libraries are just, I think, leading the charge in this work. All right, thank you so much. And jumping off something that you mentioned at the start, COVID, because I think COVID is really what brought this issue into the forefront of the conversation that everybody's having. And I was wondering if you could, all of you, if you have something to contribute, could talk a little bit about how it was that COVID brought this into such a sharp focus, and specifically into the changes that COVID brought to work and to education. And also, if you could also talk about civic engagement as well.
Okay, I'll go first. So I will bring to this my experience. I was working at a public library when COVID hit. I was the head of community services at a public library. And what I saw firsthand was everything shut down with no plan, right? We didn't know how we were going to reopen. We didn't know how we were going to continue to deliver services. And as a person whose job it was to do outreach, right? Like my job was going into the community. I did visits to daycares, senior centers, public events like fairs, and all of that was shut down in a day, right? And I knew as soon as we shut down that all of the people that I'd built relationships with, because that was my job, was building relationships, I didn't know where they were going to go at that point. I knew that people came into the library every day. If you're not a frequent public library user, I'll paint the picture for you. When you open up in the morning, there's usually 10 to 15 people standing outside waiting to get into that building to either do something, attend something, or study something, right? Like I've had people, I used to run a branch in the north end of Hartford, Albany Avenue, and we had an outlet outside, and sometimes before I opened, someone was sitting at that outlet, just using the Wi-Fi that was just on already, like just to get something done, right? So my biggest thing was, where is everybody gonna go? And then I also did school visits. So I saw schools shut down. And I saw parents like calling our phones, because we did report to the building even though the building wasn't open. And parents calling like, we share a computer, I have 4 kids. and knowing that like, you've got 4 kids sharing a computer at home, no one ever planned on the classroom going virtual that fast, right? And then first they're trying to keep them busy, second they're trying to get them educated. But that really changed the way of life, right? So that being said, I saw immediately the difference between the haves and the have-nots. I saw people, a lot of people did shift and they figured it out, and they found someone selling something and figured it out, but that's just not the reality for everybody, right? Like, what happens when the resource doesn't come through, or what happens when, you're used to your child getting lunch in school every day, and now you've got to buy groceries for the week, so maybe you have a little bit less money to do other things. So that being said, life changed, expectations change, and a lot didn't go back to the way it was done before. So COVID-19 really did change, change the way we walk through the world and get our everyday things done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think I'll take a point of view, kind of the national point of view. How did this bubble up nationally as a result of COVID? And I think COVID dramatically demonstrated how important the internet had become in our society and how extensive it's used. And we see on a positive feature of the internet, businesses could tell people to stay home, work from home. If you got the internet, it's almost like being in the office. So the internet was really solving a huge problem. Now, not everybody, I'm exaggerating, not everybody could work from home if you're not on the internet. But probably the people that were down here downtown, most of them were able to work at home. And it shows the importance of the internet. Then the other case I think was really important for everybody to understand was education, when the schools had to shut down. And the internet access and supporting education during COVID were very important in the ARPA and the various federal programs. I think the fact that a digital divide existed and the people that were on the wrong side of the divide were really being harmed, were really at a disadvantage, that became critical. And I think that led to the very substantial investment that we see in the infrastructure program of Biden and the expansion of the BID program in particular. So I think you're absolutely right. It demonstrated how important it was, and that a good internet service can really solve a lot of problems. But we discovered that there's a lot of people that don't have access, and those people are truly disadvantaged. And I like your example of 4 people using one computer. Mm-hmm. This was another problem that we turned up, that there was a lot of dissatisfaction in this 10-15% were not satisfied. These are people that had the internet, were not satisfied with it. And a big source of concern was that in their household, there were too many people for too few computers or devices. So anyway, I think COVID was really important. Have we moved into policies? I could keep going on a different topic. If everybody said what they want to do about COVID.
Yeah, well, there's a question on policies a little bit later on, but if you have something to...
I'll follow your lead.
Yeah, okay. Well, Christine.
Pardon?
COVID.
Well, as I said, libraries had to figure out how to get services to people who were not online. And those encounters, I think, made it very clear to libraries and towns that there was something missing in their service model. And one thing that was very interesting out of this, the whole early experiences of digital navigators was, the old model was, we have a skills center downtown, the library's got a computer lab, You know, these things are there. If you happen to be on a bus line, then people might actually be able to get there. If the hours actually are something somebody with 2 jobs can actually make, that might work. But the navigation process was much more flexible. And navigators set up in barbershops, and barbers called their clients and said, somebody's here who can get you a computer and help you. They set up in coffee shops. They set up at McDonald's because people who were taking the bus from one job to another job could name a site where they could jump off and do their half-hour or hour engagement with a navigator. So I think the whole COVID experience just of figuring out how to deliver services in a new way and make connections with people who need things, I think is critical to the models that we're developing now, which are not unique to digital navigation. I mean, community service organizations have had varieties of this model for a very long time. But to understand that if you want to reach the 10% in your town who has had all of these obstacles to digital connectivity and using things, that you need a new approach where people are actually can have trust, they can not expect to be screened to see if they're the worthy poor or something like that, then in fact they're going to be respected, and that anybody in need is understood to be, getting them online is understood to be a wonderful contribution for the whole society, critical for democracy and other things. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, now, Robert, let's talk about policy.
Okay.
So what policy strategies are available in order to address the digital divide?
What I'd like to do is just very briefly go back to 2 historical cases that when we're talking about the range of alternatives, these 2 cases are really important. One was the establishment of a national postal service. Of course, we all know it dates back to Ben Franklin, but early in the 19th century, the federal government decided that rural postal service was essential for rural society. An agreement was reached between state government, local governments to make sure they had accessible roads in rural areas, and the federal post office would deliver mail on a regular basis. So in this case, the federal government recognized that mail service, daily mail service, had become essential to the society, to the well-being of the society, and particularly to the development of the society. And the term that's oftentimes used is called universal service. The federal government decided postal service should be universal. Everybody should have access to it. And if it's really expensive to deliver it in rural areas, we're going to mobilize our resources with state government to make sure the roads are good enough for service to occur there. So we're going to subsidize high-cost areas, and that was understood. And in order to achieve the universal service goal, high-cost areas would be treated separately. That we were going to treat them. The second is our the basic regulation of telephone service until the latter part of last century. We had a regulated monopoly, Ma Bell it was called. And there was an agreement reached where high-profit, long-distance service would subsidize local service in order to keep rates low. As with postal service, federal government decided a telephone was essential for all members of the society. Again, we had a universal service. So an agreement was reached, a regulatory agreement was reached with the telephone companies. We're going to let you cross-subsidize. We're going to let you take profits from one area in order to keep local service rates low. Now, there was problems with that model in and of itself, but it really fell apart as a result of advanced technology. So thinking in the same terms, internet is like postal service, it's like telephone service, something that we all recognize is really important. How are we going to provide it, particularly in areas where either you have high-cost areas, rural areas, out west someplace, or high-cost areas in urban settings where maybe there's also affordability issues mixed in. That is, you're going to have to provide, you need to provide a good service, internet service, at a low price so everybody can purchase it. So that's the model. So think about the funding for that kind of model. One way is to use taxes. We'll take public money and subsidize high-cost service, which is what we've been doing until just recently. You all may know of the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. Thank you. This also came out of the COVID, kind of at the end of, during COVID, it was recognized how important the service was. So this is if for eligible people, you got $30 a month off of your internet premium. So federal government decided this is important. We're going to provide this service. Unfortunately, it didn't reach nearly all the population that needed it, and it has been ended. It ended just a couple of months ago, so we no longer have it. 156,000 families in Connecticut benefited from this program that was ended a couple of months ago. So that's one model. We're going to use taxes. Some states have also added their own state money into subsidies for internet service of low-income people. So that would be one model. Another model is that we have public monopolies. There's some cities around the country, there's some rural co-ops that provide internet services themselves. So it's a public monopoly to provide services. That is not a fashionable way of doing it, but that would be another model if we're just thinking about different ways of going about it. Another way to generate resources or to help solve this problem of finance is when companies that are regulated that are providing internet, such as the cable companies or the telephone companies, agreements can be reached in order to provide some kind of benefit to the company for a low-priced program for low-income people. So a negotiated arrangement where we would, in effect, ask the private companies that the private companies would do certain things in order to keep prices low. So that would be another model dealing with the affordability issue. Another strategy, Chris just laid it out perfectly, this part of it to informing people on how to use the internet and strategies to make this work at a local level, I think is very good. I would point out, more generally, in some ways, public education did something like this during COVID. That we could think about our public agencies as mechanisms to enhance internet access, which is essentially what they did for kids. Public school says, here, we're going to give you a computer, we're going to help you with your access, you can use the internet at home. So that's a public agency taking the initiative. And we think of the IRS or Social Security or Medicaid, all of these public agencies are benefiting financially. They're all nonprofit, obviously, but they're benefiting financially by being able to provide services over the internet. It's a lot less expensive. They have to keep systems for people that aren't on the internet, but maybe we could think of ways of encouraging the public agencies to be more engaged in solving these problems. In some ways, I think the libraries kind of give us a model for that. So those are a couple of ideas about alternatives. A long-term solution, I think there has to involve finance in such a way that if the cost of providing good service in an area exceeds the ability of local residents to pay for it, there's going to have to be some way to subsidize the residents or to make the companies whole if they have a low price, if they have to lower their premium in order to deal with that population. So there's got to be a financial component to it, in addition to these others, improving the knowledge base of people that may not have access to the internet.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor. So, Lauren, all these recommendations that Professor Wilson has been giving, so all the research that the School of Public Policy did was for the benefit of the State Digital Equity Plan. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit the goals of the State Digital Equity Plan.
So I am going to read a little bit just because I don't want to miss anything. Okay. And we have very specific wording, so that's the only reason why. If anyone has questions, I know we are waiting till the end for questions, but if I go through something too fast or it doesn't make sense, please just raise your hand and I will clarify. Oh, and there is a mic right there that she can ask questions. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, our plan is available at ct.gov/digital equity. And we came up with 5 goals. The first goal is people-centered, and that is promoting the development of digital and technical support programs. The second one is increasing public awareness of digital equity resources. After that, it's ensuring residents have affordable internet options, supporting the development of accessible digital government services, fostering high-speed broadband infrastructure build-out, and encouraging ongoing learning about digital equity best practices. These goals all aim to ensure that Connecticut residents can benefit from digital tools and services, thereby reducing the digital divide. So just to unpack that a little bit, we're putting people first. Skills and access to educational opportunities is coming first. After that, it's awareness. So awareness means in one respect, asset mapping. That means having an interactive tool that individuals can use to find out what is available where they live. Connecticut has a different divide than the rest of the country. What I would say is, or the way I would define it is, we have great wealth and great need. With that large dynamic, you want to make sure that as we move forward, that people know what's available in the area they live in, so that they can access those tools and services. Connecticut has two rural areas, the Northeast and the Northwest. Service hours of organizations that serve those areas might be very different than like where I live in New Haven, right? I live in an urban area that has a very dense population, that has a lot of different nonprofits around. It's going to be different in the Northeast and the Northwest. So we want to be able to serve those areas. We are looking to cover the state regionally, and that is one of the requirements of the Digital Equity Plan. And the lines that we have used so far are those with the regional education cooperatives. So that would mean in New Haven, I can't even think of the name of it at this moment. Sorry, my mind went blank. But anyway, up here in this area, it's CREC. CREC serves this region, and we're looking to get nonprofits, educational organizations all to work together to say what's going on in their region and possibly reevaluate the way they're giving services. Because to be honest, a lot of different organizations are doing things that are similar to digital navigation. They're just not calling it that. So we're putting a new spin on services they're already providing. So that being said, we'll be working on an asset map in the next year, and we're working on developing partnerships. And then sometime next year, we're hoping to roll out sub-grants. We hope to spend a significant amount of the funding that we received from the federal government to support local organizations. Chris talked about trust earlier, and as I've said, I come from a public library. I think when COVID hit, I was at Meriden Public Library. Before that, I worked for Hartford Public Library. I've also worked for Norwalk Public Library. And trust is the glue that gets people to both use those services and And it will help us move forward in this state because we really need to hear from the people that we are serving. One of the biggest things that we can do out of these goals is listen. It's not going to come down to what we help someone do. It's going to be really listening to what people tell us they need and then responding. So what I would expect from our digital equity, our plan in the future, is that we are going to be providing feedback loops to make sure that we are bringing together any data that we've put together, any lessons learned from these collaboratives, and then hearing from digital navigators, like what are people telling you, and taking that and implementing some of those best practices. Does anyone have any questions on what I said? I know that was kind of a lot.
Perfect.
And we're good.
Thank you so much. All right. So, Christine, now that we've heard from the state's digital equity plan, could I hear a little bit about the vision of libraries and in terms of what they can do for the digital divide in the future?
Well, first of all, we're very supportive of the effort of the state, the digital equity plan, and we're confident. I mean, we've been involved, we've discussed it as part of our Connecticut Libraries and Partners for Digital Equity. And we're pretty confident that this is going to put us on a road toward what we need in the state. But obviously like Bob, our vision goes well beyond the initial projections of the state equity plan. And I have a few points that were developed by Connecticut Libraries and Partners as part of our public comment when the DEEP plan, the broadband infrastructure plan, was first worked out. And the number one thing, of course, is that libraries don't want to have to rely on extraordinary grants every year, every 2 years, in order to hire multilingual navigators that they can work with. Now most libraries hire them as contractors, temporary people to work on a short-term basis with community organizations. We imagine that navigation will become, whatever you call it, a job category with clear skill set where there'll be large state pools of trainees fully funded and available to function on a regional basis with libraries and community organizations and agencies as is logical in many navigation programs published with public housing or health organizations. We envision a moment where we won't have to rely on out-of-state nonprofits to access refurbished devices to give out to the population. And eventually we think we need a system in place in which computers from business, government, and education are being recycled, refurbished, and periodically updated with tech support and available through all anchor organizations and agencies for the use of navigators and residents at all times. And of course, we're committed to universal service. We're committed to a future in which every household has access to high-speed broadband as a right and a truly affordable connection. We remember that in many studies show that what families think is affordable is about $1 or some very extremely nominal fee. So we understand the future has to solve the affordability question. And if we had these things, then libraries could begin to, once again focus on what they do best, which is connecting with community organizations in their towns to provide information, education, cultural enrichment, entertainment, and so forth, but it would be available to every resident in a way that it is not now due to the digital divide. So basically, forward, we want to go forward together with everybody else in the state, but we look forward to the time when there's many models and we're part of these regional structures that are going to advance providing these services.
Thank you so much. It was beautifully put. All right, so we are coming close to the end of our conversation, and we'll have time to open it up to questions. But before we do that, I thought I would ask you, all of you could sort of as a bookend to our conversation, if you could share with us, how can we know if the challenge of the digital divide is being met or not? So how can we know if we're doing a good job? How do we know?
Well, I think Lauren laid out the baseline. That is, data will be important, but in fact, the kind of research that will tell us the full truth is sort of participatory research in the community, headed up by people who have the trust of people in the community who can say what's working, what isn't, how close are we to this new place. So I think we have to do, so I'll stop there and let Lauren take up the mantle.
So for me, it's actually going to be knowing where your resources are. I think success in terms of bridging the divide is having a generation that will know that they can either go to their library, go to a website, go to some community resource to get the help they need. Because the truth is, the need for devices, I don't necessarily see going away. They are objects that need to be continuously either updated, upkept, or replaced. And your situation can change every few years. So you might have money for a great computer this decade. Next decade, it might be a different story because you've entered a different phase of life. You have different needs. And for me, success really will hinge on people knowing where to go to get help when they need it.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, Chris has kind of set this up. If you want to go strictly by the numbers, you would say, well, when the digital divide is, we are down to 1 or 2% of the population does not have access. That's a good goal. There's always going to be some people that are going to cut the wire, don't want to be on the grid, want to disappear, so we're not going to get 100%. You could say, so we'll get a small percentage, maybe 2% or 3%. But that's really inadequate, really for the reasons that Chris kind of laid out. We want to make sure that people are making good utilization, that they know how to utilize it. It's not that we're going to tell them what they need to do, but know how to utilize it and feel confident in the utilization. There's going to be impacts also on the economy. When you think about what the Postal Service did and the telephony, and this really funny story, Sears and Roebuck and developed this mail order catalog when we had rural mail service. Huge impact. And right now, the benefits of our high-tech society are not accruing to a big piece of the population. So we should see economic benefit accrue also as we move toward this goal.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for a wonderful conversation. And I think I would like now to open it up to the public. If you have any questions, please just raise your hand and let my colleague come to you with the microphone. And also, if you're watching online, do feel free to type your question in the chat or in the comments.
Thank you all. Great conversation, great topics. I want to first start by really kudos to the Commission of Educational Technology. I guess you're the representative. I worked with Doug Casey.
He's great.
For almost a year, I used to attend all the meetings. I wrote a couple of testimonials for net neutrality, which is a big thing, and this commission really fought for us. So I want to first thank you for that. Net neutrality is very important. It really makes everything very equitable. My question is about the use of broadband has changed profoundly during COVID, and that is online medicine.
Yes.
Telehealth,
Yeah.
Teladoc is a private company. And we saw that during COVID, so much so that the federal government pushed for having Medicare and Medicaid services online as much as possible. It's not possible for all services. So the urgency is there, and how do you think, what new policies we should have from the state side to address that? Because we definitely need online, and we need health equity as well. And the other thing that goes along with it is, mental health, behavioral health. That's another huge issue, and a lot of that can be addressed online as well. So online health and equity it's a big issue. Okay, so I'll leave it to you three. Any of you go. But I think it's a huge state policy issue. So, Professor, go ahead. Thank you.
I don't have a good answer, but if you think about this, telehealth would be a really good example of that. There is, I think, I may be wrong, but I suspect great amount of money are being saved as a result of telehealth. If you think about time and energy and hope, it saves. It's going to make the delivery less expensive. If it ends up being less expensive and it's a Medicare or Medicaid, shouldn't it be taxed in a way to create a fund to make sure everybody can access the internet? If we think about all the different ways the internet generates wealth, there needs to be ways, we only need a little bit, a tiny percentage. If there's a way we could tax the use of the internet for a fund for affordability, it would be, probably people probably wouldn't even notice that they're paying a tax for that. Because really, if you think about it in those terms, it should be, it's embarrassing that we've not already figured this out. That, this group of people that don't have access are being left behind. When all these benefits accrue. And so tax would be one part of it. One of the big problems is you got all these different kinds of internet providers. How are you going to tax, if somebody just does their internet over the satellite, how are you going to collect it? You figure out what the tax should be and how you're going to collect it. But, there's a lot of wealth there, and there should be some ways to tax it to make sure everybody is part of the system. This is essentially what we did with the telephone company. The high profit, long distance service was taxed, and it was not really taxed. It didn't go to the public coffers. It moved from the interstate part of Ma Bell to the local Ma Bell, and they could keep telephone rates low that way. So there's what we call cross-subsidization.
I did just want to add, because this isn't really your question, but I did want to just bring it back. One of the outcomes we are watching with the digital equity plan are health outcomes. Your access to the internet and the skills to use it will impact your health care. So it is something that we are discussing. And then, my little side story is around the country, there's a few different interesting things going on. I want to say Delaware had a huge grant at some point to have telehealth kiosks in libraries. So as we move forward through this work, I'm not really sure where it's going to go, but I would say that the healthcare discussion is a part of the digital equity work as well.
I could add that we partner with Hartford Healthcare, who has, as part of their community outreach and equity work, does basically field navigators, medical navigators, and they report the tremendous sort of civil rights aspect of being able to be online for telehealth. It has a big impact for sections of the population, youth, queer youth, and others who have difficulties with the health system. This is very important to them. And then, of course, it's just the cost, the transportation, and everything else. So I will also say that the American Library Association is, as an organization that advocates for access, is actually very involved in urging that the Universal Service Fund, USAC, that funds E-rate support for internet service for libraries, that there's an expanded source of funding for E-rate so that they can provide not just help with internet connections, but with digital equity work. I mean, in the short term, they're doing modest things like making it possible for libraries to get discounts on hotspots that they loan and computers that they loan and that kind of thing. But there is a lot of thinking, as Bob suggests there should be, about where are the funds going to come for libraries, at least, to provide these services and for all the residents that are in our catchment areas.
Thank you so much. All right. Any other questions? Over here.
Thank you. Thank you again to all of you for your participation today. I had some thoughts about technology literacy and the works that are happening in the libraries and colleges and towns throughout the country. And it dawned on me whether or not it seems plausible to come up with a digital passport that is administered by a library. And one of the reasons why that came to mind is that I used to chair the school-based management team of a New York City middle/high school that focused on integrating technology throughout the entire curriculum. And as part of a 5-year plan, what we focused on in technology was to decide, okay, when this student graduates from this school, what we want them to know about technology. We want them to know how to use a web browser. We want them to know how to troubleshoot issues with their operating system. We want them to know when they need to call for tech support. Things like that. Similarly, I'm thinking that it would be relatively easy to integrate a digital passport system, not only at local libraries, but not-for-profits. It basically just takes a collaborative effort and perhaps a little will organization to institute a program like that. You'll get a lot of coverage. You'll deal with organizations that are already in place. I think I heard one of you, I think it was Lauren, mention, a lot of organizations are providing similar services. They're just not calling it the same thing. But digital passports would be a way to not only ensure that people get the technology skills that they need, but that's your documentation right there, your future funding, your subsidies that fund hardware, upgrades, software, et cetera. Just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of models and practitioners who work on integrating any kind of digital education with workforce development and organizing workforce development, collaborating with community organizations to provide spaces and curricula and that kind of thing for the advance. But is your proposal primarily about standardizing the curricula and then funding, looking at a much bigger scope than it currently exists?
Basic literacy to address the immediate gaps.
Right.
And then, of course, with progress and with proof of concept, to expand into a larger program.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's an excellent idea.
So I guess my follow-up, though, is that an effort for the services to follow the individual?
Well, I think that depends on two things.
Okay.
Depends on the service recipient.
Yep.
Whether they want to be tracked. A lot of people don't.
That's what I'm thinking
I
about.
happen to be one of them. But going back to the initial purpose of the digital passport is basically to ensure that you've established a baseline of technology literacy for a gap audience that has already been identified.
So You make a very interesting point, and while I don't have a great answer, I can tell you about a few different things going on in the state of Connecticut. One of those being opportunity centers are going to be rolled out, I think, sometime next year. I believe there's premises on one, which would be state service access with some support for those state services. Second, I know from state colleges that they have been implementing something called equity centers. And at these equity centers, they're using a software called CTOldStateHouse. And CTOldStateHouse is basically a way for individuals to fill out questionnaires, and it will tell them what services they qualify for. I think that's really supportive in terms of students who might not realize they have access to certain services because they're in that transitional age of, school lunch, and what do you do after school lunch ends, right? The need didn't change. So I think some of these state colleges are doing a really good job at developing a different approach. And again, those are opt-in, and I think that they do some level of not tracking, but you tell them what information you want in that system. And that being said, it gives people a little direction on what they have access to. And then to shout out libraries, the state library has offered local libraries access to a software called Northstar for digital skill development. So depending on the library that you attend, you can also look for other libraries nearby. Some of these libraries offer proctoring for that Northstar service, and that will give you badges based on different digital skills. Adult Ed also uses Northstar, so anyone enrolled in an adult ed program also has that access.
Okay, one more question that just came to mind, specifically as it speaks to a digital divide, and that is the 508 compliance regulation, actually. And I was wondering, 508 compliance was developed in the interest of connecting people of varying disabilities or varying abilities with information that you and I would normally pick up a book to read or climb stairs to go into a building, and 508 compliance actually speaks to the digital piece that makes information accessible to people who are neurodivergent, who may be blind, who may be audially impaired. And I was wondering whether or not there are any, 508 compliance has actually been updated within the past 6 years. And I was wondering whether or not there is anything in any of the programs that any of you are working with currently that incorporates accessibility into the programs that you're offering to the public.
Well, I can just say that we have nonprofit and agencies, groups like Ars Tech and others that have been grant funded and been collaborating with the state, and that merge accessibility and navigation. And on Digital Inclusion Week, we've been highlighting their work, but they're not, and there are other larger institutions that are doing that. I think it will become quite integral to digital navigation as it expands, and most people consider it pretty critical, though not like every individual library can juggle all these balls, right? Because you need the Arabic navigator and the Spanish navigator, and you want to have somebody. But most navigators, when you talk to the peer groups, if they encounter this the first time, then they dive in and self-educate themselves and become capable of functioning, at least, in these initial encounters with people who have accessibility issues and need service. But I agree with you that it's a huge component of any successful project and campaign and future that we envision.
Thank you. All right, maybe I have time for one last question.
Yeah, so I had a question about the policy. So earlier, Professor Wilson, you were talking about the different ways that internet access has been done. So with competing companies in areas where there's local monopolies, kind of like a utility. And given the fact that internet is kind of deemed as a human right, partially by the UN, and other things like water and electricity are utilities and do have local monopolies usually. My question really is, what are kind of the advantages and disadvantages of treating internet as a utility where there's a local monopoly? I mean, it seems to be structured where a natural monopoly is the best, structure, because you don't need 3 companies sending lines to the same house. But in general, are there any disadvantages to viewing it as a utility? Why is that not the system that we have in place today?
This is not a field that I've studied much, but I do have a sense of what's going on. First of all, public utilities for internet provision are most readily acceptable in the rural co-ops. And the history of the rural co-ops is that private sector utilities didn't want to deal because they were high-cost areas. So a bunch of locals get together and do their own utility. You may know this history. And it's really an interesting part of the settling of the West, that you do have this form of really, they're all owned by the people that are living there. In cities, they have popped up in instances where the cities got fed up with the private sector providers. That prices were too high, service was too bad, and they said, we'll just do it ourselves. And there's a few of those. There's just extreme pressure from private sector providers against this. So I think there's kind of the ideological war, I think, has already been won, or lost, to be known. I think the advantage is just what we've been talking about. You could ensure that everybody, you could do universal service from the get-go, so you don't have an issue there. So that would be one advantage. The disadvantage is whether or not a public utility of this type would keep up with technological change. This is probably the argument that is most prevalent now that we have this real wide range of providers, satellites and microwave and all these other kinds, that say, let the competition kind of figure out how to resolve, provide the best services and provide opportunities for consumers. Unfortunately, that model leaves, as we just saw, leaves the digital divide in its wake.
That's interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much again to our panelists. This was a wonderful conversation. And thank you all as well for coming into our last program in Control Shift Democracy. Yeah. I want to give a special thank you to those of you who came to all 3 programs. You get applause for yourselves. And but otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. If you have a parking stub, please do go downstairs to our visitor services desk, and they will be able to validate it for you. And grab some snacks, grab some drinks, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.